The silk shimmered like it had a heartbeat of its own. She froze mid-step, dust rag still in her hand, the vacuum's hum fading behind her as she stared at the gown hanging in the master bedroom. It should have been inside the walk-in closet, folded away with the dozens of other garments she wasn't supposed to touch. Instead, it dangled from the heavy oak door as if it were waiting for her. The chandelier above caught the fabric, casting ripples of gold and ivory across the marble floor, so luminous it looked less like cloth and more like liquid light. She had seen it before, of course. The wife had worn it to a charity gala last winter, her arm hooked through the Millionaires, cameras flashing as they stepped into black cars. The gown was famous in its own right, mentioned in the gossip columns, praised by fashion editors. And now it stood inches from her, close enough to touch. Her fingers tightened around the rag until her knuckles whitened. She told herself to look away, to keep moving, to remember the rules of this house. Clean, polish, disappear. That was her role. But the dress seemed alive in the silence, whispering to her, daring her to imagine. She glanced at the door. Empty hallway. She tilted her head, listening for footsteps. Nothing. For a fleeting moment, the room belonged to her alone. She shifted closer, the faint scent of perfume still clinging to the silk. She lifted her hand, stopped halfway, and then let her palm graze the hem. It was softer than anything she had ever touched. Her breath caught. In the mirror across the room, she caught sight of herself. Plain uniform, dark against the brilliance of the fabric. The contrast stabbed her. She had been invisible in this house for months. Her work noticed only when it wasn't perfect. Her presence acknowledged only when someone needed to scold or dismiss. Yet here, in the quiet, she let her imagination slip. She pictured herself stepping into that dress, the silk sliding over her skin, her reflection transformed. Not the maid. Not the shadow in the corner. Someone else. Someone seen. Her chest rose sharply as if the thought alone could lift her into another life. The creak of the house settled her nerves, reminding her where she was. She yanked her hand back as if burned, shaking her head. This was madness. She couldn't even be caught standing this close, let alone imagining more. She turned back to the bed, straightening pillows, forcing herself into the rhythm of duty. But her eyes betrayed her, darting back to the gown every few seconds, as if afraid it might vanish if she looked away. The shimmer under the chandelier refused to fade. It clung to her vision even when she turned her back. By the time she finished the room, her pulse still hadn't slowed. She pressed her palms against her apron, willing her thoughts to stay buried. But something had shifted. The dress had planted itself in her mind, not as fabric, but as a mirror she couldn't unsee. It was dangerous, intoxicating, impossible. And yet, as she closed the door behind her, she couldn't help but glance back one last time. It felt like more than temptation. It felt like fate waiting on a hanger. If you enjoy this story so far, let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. The silence of the mansion wrapped around her like a heavy blanket, pressing down as the day's exhaustion clung to her bones. She had polished, scrubbed, and carried her way through endless rooms that gleamed for people who never once looked her in the eye. Invisible, always. Useful, but never seen. And now, in the master bedroom, with its chandelier dripping light across the polished floors, she felt the weight of that invisibility more than ever. The gown still hung in place, glowing with the same impossible radiance, as though daring her to acknowledge it again. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. Just a touch, she told herself, but her grip tightened around the silk, pulling it from the hanger. The fabric slid through her fingers like water. She hesitated, heart pounding, as if the walls themselves were witnesses ready to betray her. But no footsteps echoed. No voices called. The house was quiet. She drew a long breath, set down her apron, and before her courage could falter, she stepped into the gown. It slipped over her frame as if it had been waiting for her all along. The silk clung where it should, flowed where it must, and transformed her reflection in the mirror. She blinked, startled. Gone was the tired maid in a plain uniform. In her place stood a woman radiant, luminous, almost regal. Her brown skin glowed under the chandelier's light, the gown hugging her like a promise. For the first time in years, she didn't see exhaustion etched into her eyes. She saw strength, elegance, a kind of power she had long buried beneath duty. She turned slightly, watching how the dress moved with her. Each step felt like stepping into a different life. She let her shoulders straighten, her chin lift. The reflection in the mirror wasn't apologizing for taking up space. She wasn't background anymore. She was the center. Her breath caught at the sight, tears threatening to rise. How many years had she spent bowing her head, shrinking, being told through silence that she was less? And now, their dress had become a mirror of what she had always been capable of, but was never allowed to show. Her hand lifted to her chest, pressing gently against the fabric, grounding herself in the reality of the moment. The gown's shimmer danced across her fingertips. She smiled, faint at first, then fuller. It was not vanity. It was recognition. This was her, too. The woman inside the shadows who refused to stay small forever. But even as her heart swelled, a tremor of fear ran through her. She knew what it would mean if anyone saw her like this. They would not see dignity, they would see theft, they would not see grace. They would see defiance. Yet she couldn't bring herself to take it off, not just yet. This moment belonged to her, the first where she was not invisible, not silent, not erased. Just herself, radiant and undeniable. The sound of laughter and polished shoes on marble drifted upward before she even realized the clock had slipped past the hour. Her heart sank too late. Guests had arrived early. Downstairs, the mansion bloomed with voices, the kind that filled every corner, echoing against the chandeliers and gilded walls. She froze in the bedroom doorway, the silk gown draped across her body like a secret that could no longer be hidden. For a heartbeat, she thought she could retreat, slip back inside, change quickly before anyone noticed. But the rhythm of the crowd pulled her forward. Still caught in her daze, she stepped into the hall, meaning only to call out for another servant, perhaps to confirm what she was hearing. Her foot touched the top stair. Then the music stopped. Conversations faltered. Heads turned upward as though drawn by instinct. She descended halfway before she realized the eyes were all on her. The grand hall below shimmered with jewels, tuxedos, gowns in every shade of wealth, and in the center of it all, she stood, uninvited, wrapped in silk that did not belong to her. Gasps broke the silence, sharp as glass shattering. Fans paused mid-wave, glasses of champagne hovered, forgotten in midair. One guest whispered too loudly, the word "Maid" cutting through the hush. The color drained from her face, but her spine did not bend. For a second, it was as though the gown itself shielded her, demanding that if the crowd stared, they would see not shame but presence. The millionaire's wife had not yet appeared, and that absence made the moment stretch unbearably long. The men in their tailored suits shifted, some in amusement, some in outrage. Women whispered behind jeweled hands, but none could look away. Her skin glowed in the chandelier's golden light, the silk pooling at her feet like liquid fire. She hadn't meant for this entrance, hadn't meant for any entrance at all, but fate had pulled her from the shadows into the blaze of a stage she never asked for. A voice from the back coughed, then laughed, breaking the fragile stillness. Others joined, awkward, uncertain whether to sneer or admire. Her hands trembled at her sides, hidden in the folds of the gown, but she didn't retreat. If she turned now, if she ran, she would become nothing more than a servant who forgot her place. If she stayed, even trembling, she was something else entirely. A woman who, if only for a moment, commanded the gaze of everyone who had ever dismissed her. She met their stares, first timid, then steady, her breath settling into something calm. The crowd, glittering and privileged, could not decide if they were scandalized or spellbound. And in that hesitation, in that breathless pause, she realized she had already changed something. Whether they gasped in horror or awe, they would never again look at her without remembering the night the maid became the center of the room. The sound of heels striking marble cut through the murmur like a knife. At the top of the grand staircase, framed by the glow of the chandelier, the millionaire's wife appeared. Her presence alone was enough to silence the hall, the crowd parting their whispers into breathless anticipation. All eyes shifted upward, waiting for the storm that seemed inevitable. Her gaze locked instantly on the maid below, wrapped in her gown. It was not a glance of confusion. She recognized the silk, the cut, the rare shimmer that had once made her the center of any room. Gasps slipped from the guests, scandal sparking like electricity across their jeweled faces. A ripple of expectation coursed through the hall. Humiliation was coming. Surely, the wife would tear her down, reclaim what was hers, and end the spectacle with the kind of cruelty that only the powerful could wield. The maid, still frozen, braced for it. Her chest rose sharply, hands pressed against the silk as though steadying herself for the blow. She had nowhere to run. If she turned now, she would be chased by shame. If she stood still, she would be crushed beneath the weight of the wife's fury. But the silence stretched longer than expected. Too long. Instead of rage, the wife's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. At first, her eyes narrowed. Not in anger, but in study. Her lips parted slightly, then closed again, as though words had come, but been swallowed back. There was something else there, buried beneath the polished exterior she wore like armor. Recognition, perhaps, even envy. The room did not know what to make of it. The guests leaned closer to one another, whispering sharp fragments that cracked through the hush. Disgrace. How dare she? Look at her standing there. Yet the wife's face betrayed no outburst, no public scene. Instead, her gaze lingered with a heaviness that unsettled the air. She seemed to see not a servant, not a thief of gowns, but a reflection of something she had once been radiant, alive, unafraid of being seen. The maid's breath steadied, her eyes locked on the woman who held her fate in a single gesture. She expected condemnation. But what she saw instead was a softness in the wife's shoulders, a tiny loosening of her perfectly poised frame. It was the kind of shift that only those watching closely could notice. The guests did not see it. They saw only scandal. But between the two women, something unspoken passed. It lasted no more than a few seconds. Yet, it was enough. The wife turned her head slowly, breaking the connection, and began her descent. She did not shout. She did not strip the dress away. She simply allowed the silence to linger, her presence overshadowing the chaos without extinguishing it. And in that silence, the maid realized the truth. Sometimes the deepest wounds were not inflicted with anger, but with quiet recognition of a power that could not be denied. The hall remained suspended between awe and gossip, but beneath the jeweled lights, two women understood that the night had already changed them both. The millionaire moved at last, his polished shoes striking the marble floor as he stepped into the center of the room. The crowd hushed, their anticipation sharp as a blade. His face was unreadable, caught somewhere between fury and something more dangerous fascination. He was a man used to control, used to bending the atmosphere to his will, yet in that moment it was not his presence commanding the room. It was hers. The black maid, draped in silk that shimmered beneath the chandelier, stood tall. She did not fidget or shrink back, though the weight of every eye pressed hard against her shoulders. The dress clung as though it had always been meant for her, its brilliance no longer a possession of the wife or a symbol of wealth, but an extension of her own quiet defiance. The whispers tightened, sharp as needles. She'll be dismissed. This is the end for her. How dare she? Yet the longer the silence stretched, the more the balance shifted. Instead of disgrace, people began to see something else, the way her chin lifted, the way the light seemed to favor her, the way she no longer blended into the shadows of service. She was no longer invisible. The millionaire opened his mouth, then closed it again. He was expected to lash out, to restore order with cold authority. But his hesitation was telling. He saw what they all saw. A woman transformed not by fabric, but by the undeniable presence that radiated from within. He felt the judgment of the crowd as much as she did, yet he also felt the crack in his own composure, the realization that something had shifted far beyond his control. The wife remained still on the staircase, her expression unreadable, her silence an echo of her own inner conflict. But even she could not erase the truth. It was there in the gasps, in the stolen glances, in the sudden knowledge sweeping through the guests. Status and wealth could dictate titles and positions, but they could not dictate dignity. When at last the millionaire spoke, his voice was quieter than expected, stripped of its usual weight. He did not condemn her. He did not praise her. He simply let the silence close around his words, leaving the rest unsaid. The damage, or perhaps the revelation, was already complete. The maid turned her steps steady as she crossed the floor. She did not bow her head. She did not ask for forgiveness. She carried herself as though she had been born to that space, and for the first time, the crowd parted not out of command, but out of respect. That night would be remembered, whispered about, retold in corners of the city where gossip mingled with awe. Some would call it scandal, others would call it bravery, but she knew what it truly was. It was the moment she ceased to exist only in the margins of their wealth and power, the moment she claimed her own presence, undeniable and unshakable. She had worn the dress, and in doing so, she had worn her truth. And no one in that hall would ever forget it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more emotional, dramatic, and unexpected tales. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and keep watching.